Hello and welcome to Thought Exchange. Today, I will not be interviewing anyone. The purpose of this podcast is to, among other things, exchange thoughts and grow and learn from those conversations and those shared experiences. Something I've talked about throughout the different episodes I've recorded so far is taking time to reflect. And I felt that it would be important and relevant to incorporate that into these episodes. So today I'm going to be looking at some of the lessons learned and insights from the show so far, from the guests, and realizations that I've come to myself through interviewing and talking with my friends and over the past few months. It will be another episode of Thought Exchange, but, without a guest this time. Anyway, let's get into it. Number 1, social media is not real life. This is something I talked about a lot with Kenny and Jacob. Social media originally came with the purpose of showing a snippet of who you are to the world through this thing called the internet. And some of our best practices through dealing with people in person made their way to the internet, but in a kind of corrupted fashion. Putting your best foot forward in person is, it's commonplace advice. And as Jacob mentioned in our first conversation on the show, is that when that was translated into the online world, because you don't see these people every day, because you don't get a fully fleshed out view of who they are, you only get those snapshots of them putting their best foot forward, right? You're only seeing the highlights, the highlight reel of their life. And as people, and not just as people, but as beings on the planet, as animals, this is the way that all animals interact with their environment, is through relative means. So, we know happiness because we know sadness. We know failure because we know success. We know hot because we know cold. And our, brains have evolved over time, and they have not evolved to use social media. That was not their original purpose, right? We lived in tribes and hunter-gatherer groups for, probably hundreds of thousands of years. So our brains are programmed to interact with groups of less than 100 people. And that's where our relative appreciation for our place socially in the world and the place of those around us works. And because of the globalization of the internet and social media, kind of throws things all the way out of whack. Because you can see people who have nothing to do with you doing things that have nothing to do with you. And when you're bombarded with these images and videos and posts and whatever it may be of, I don't want to say excellence, but let's say exorbitant or extraneous circumstance, boats and planes and lots of money and all of these things, it doesn't matter that you don't know those people to your brain. It doesn't matter that that stuff is irrelevant, right? It doesn't matter that everyone is really on their own path. Your brain is taking into consideration, that's one of the 100 people in my tribe, and I don't have any of those things. I must be at the bottom of my tribe, which is unfortunate because, most people are doing about average, and that's, kind of that's the point of average. That's the definition. Most people are going to be hovering around there. But people don't post average, at least for the most part. And people, in the top of whatever circle they happen to be in, they don't post the non-average things that they do on a day-to-day basis. They only post the highlights. They don't post the L's, as Kenny said in our conversation in the first episode. And it makes it even more obvious when you take that into account, the fact that they don't post losses. Because not only are you being shown these high highs, and your brain is like, well, that person's in my tribe, why am I not doing as well as them? When you're only seeing those high highs. It is your brain is making the extrapolation that everyone, every single person out there is just absolutely killing it, and I'm not. And as I said earlier, I'm at the bottom of the tribe. I'm doing the very worst. And status, regardless of what form it takes, and the realm in which you're defining the status, is extremely important to people. And not in a vain way, but just we as people have an innate sense of fairness. From early childhood, it is something observed in other primates as well. But when one person gets something and another doesn't, we see it as unfair. And when we go out into our normal lives, our regular lives, and we work hard and we do the things that really we should be doing, which is trying to build ourselves up, and it's not rewarded with yachts like it is on Instagram, it makes us feel like we're not getting our due. Which, I won't comment on whether or not we aren't getting our due, but it proliferates this sense of unfulfillment and unhappiness because relative to what we are consuming, we are lacking. So the nugget of truth, or the nugget of advice that I want to pull out of this first point, is that social media is not real life. And even though we can consciously say that and observe that and know that, subconsciously, regardless of what your mindset is, consciously, it's going to have an impact on you when you consume things that are outside of your pay grade, as we say sometimes, or outside of your lane. If you're watching billionaires' Instagram reels all the time, then it's not going to have a positive impact on most people. Some people will find it motivating to an extent, but a lot of people will be like, wow, I don't have that. I don't know if I'll ever have that. So being able to moderate and control your use of social media is difficult because it's designed to be addicting and keep your attention on the platform. It's also extremely important because despite social media's almost philanthropic purpose, which is to connect people and bring the world close together, it has very negative consequences when, as individuals, we don't regulate and approach with intention our use of social media. Number 2, you never know someone from the outside. To expand on that, don't assume that you know things about other people. This is difficult to do because making quick judgments about other people is convenient, and our brains are designed to be judgmental. They're designed to make rough estimates of our environment, the other people around us, animals, whatever it may be, to deem whether they're friendly or threatening. So we're programmed, to do that to some extent. But it's wrong. And I don't just mean to say like it's ethically wrong or it's morally wrong, but our judgments of people we don't know and even people we do know are often wrong. And I want to highlight this because in the past 7 episodes of the show, I've interviewed people that I know fairly well. A lot of them I've known for over a decade, some of them a little bit shorter, some of them a little bit longer. But as well as I know these people, I still learn from these conversations. I learn about them, and I learn about their perspectives, and I learn things that are just, objective. Well, they're subjective takes, but they're objectively useful in having a different set of perspectives. And despite me knowing some of these people for years and years, I was surprised by the answers to some of the questions I asked them. And I think it goes to show, especially with friendships that last a long time, people do change. And I don't think the saying people never change is really accurate at all. People do change quite a bit. Most people are not the same when they're 60 as they were when they're 20. And, it might even be as true to say people aren't the same when they're 55 as when they're 60. And I know that when I was 25, I was not the same person as when I was 20. So the answer to these deeper questions and these perspectives on who we are, the things we want to accomplish, who other people are, and where we see ourselves in the context of the communities that we're in, those things change significantly over time. And something that I've gotten a lot out of from this podcast is getting to know the guests who so far have been friends of mine, getting to know my friends better, and be pleasantly surprised, not necessarily with their answers, right? I'm not expecting a certain answer from people, or I'm not putting value on the fact that I want a certain answer from someone. It's in the sense that, everyone else is on their own path, doing their own journey, doing their own self-reflection, their own growth, successes and failures, and learning their own lessons. And that's a large part of the point of this channel, is consolidating that into a space, into a time that's set aside specifically for sharing these things so that everyone can benefit. But the kernel here is that you should get to know your friends, and not just your friends, but your partners or your kids or your parents. You should get to know them again. You get to know them again and again and again, because they're people just like you. They're not just your parent. They're not just your friend. And their perspectives evolve over time. And the box that you have put them in from that period of your life that they were a large part of, or whatever the situation may be, doesn't define them either, right? They have their own narrative going. I've talked a lot about stories on the podcast, but they've got their own story. And the longer you go without getting to know your friends and family, etc. again, the less you really know them. And that's what deep, meaningful connections with other people are, is getting to know them and then continuing to get to know them. So that's just something that is separate from the conversations or the conversation topics that we've talked about on the show so far, but something that I specifically noticed when reflecting on these past, few months recording the show, is that, my friends they're interesting people, and learning that again. Obviously I knew that when I initiated the friendship, and that's why we became friends, but they're still interesting people, and in different ways than I originally met them, because they're different people now. Number 3, life has unexpected turns, positive or negative. You need to be able to deal with them. This may seem self-explanatory, and in a lot of ways it is, but I want to address it specifically because of how it has impacted my life and the guests on my show. This was first brought up in episode 1 with Kenny. He was talking about becoming a bartender. He never saw himself as a bartender, but it kind of, life just pulled him in that direction. And, in a similar way, I never thought growing up that I would join the military, but I did. And, you may take a job expecting to do one thing and end up doing like video editing, like Seamus. And those are more positive to neutral changes in life. Of course, there are negative ones with health and, loss and stuff like that. But it's so important to be able to take the fact that life is not clean. It's a messy process, and things don't always go according to plan. In fact, they almost never go according to plan. Having a guiding principle or star is going to serve you a lot better than having a linear view of how you want your life to go. Because once you're off the tracks, what happens? I think that being able to see the positives in things and these changes that you don't have control over is extremely important. Because there are things you have control over and things you don't have control over. And if you don't have control over it, the best you can do is come up with a positive and self-serving mindset and frame around what's happening. For example, if you're being forced to move for a job and you don't really have control over it, you can look at it from the perspective of, I don't want to move. I have friends here. I don't want to pick up all my stuff, put it in a truck, and drive somewhere else. Simplified version of the gripes that would come along with moving when you don't want to. A positive spin would be, I'm going to have the opportunity to meet a completely new group of people, have a completely new set of experiences in a new place. And one of the great things about moving to a new place is you have no baggage there. You have no ties and no negative experiences there. If you've lived in a neighborhood for a long time, you can walk down the street and think of bad things that have happened on that street, or on that, or in this room of the house, or whatever it is. When you move to a new place, it's all fresh. It's all fresh. It's all new. There's no reminders of negative or positive things. And that's just one way of having a positive spin on something that otherwise could be taken as negative. And taking those changes in stride is part of being a resilient person. Resiliency is something that I value highly in myself and in the people around me, because it's aligned with reliability. Will you be able to get the job done? And I use the word job loosely, because getting the job done might mean, showing up for a friend. It might mean just keeping the house clean. It might mean actually doing a job. But people who can get the job done in adverse circumstances, that's the telltale sign that that person has done the internal work to make their mind and their external environment work for them. Turn them into allies instead of obstacles or enemies. Life is a journey, and accepting that change is coming is a big part of maturing. Accepting that change will come, and it will do things that you like, and it will do things that you don't like. And having the fortitude mentally to not avoid that idea, not avoid the consequences, or pretend like they're not going to happen, or plan for them as if they weren't going to happen. That is going to lead you to a fuller life. You can pretend that your parents are going to live forever, or your grandparents are going to live forever. You can pretend that you will always be able to, compete in your favorite sport, or go hiking when you want to. But if you pretend that these things are true, you won't act as if they aren't. You won't act like, I should spend more time with my parents or grandparents or family, because our time is limited. You won't act like, I should make sure that I get out and enjoy nature, because one day my knees won't work as well as they do now. And coming to grips with the fact that life is not what we want it to be. It just is. And hoping for a life without trials, an easy life, will not be as fulfilling as hoping for a good life. And in my opinion, a good life has its ups and downs, because as I spoke about earlier, we view things in relation to each other. The downs are what make the ups up, and the highs so high. It's what makes spending time with our friends special, and our loved ones special, because we know what it's like to not be able to do that, to be isolated, or to be overseas, or whatever it is. And acknowledging that these things change is the first step to acting in a way that is going to bring you the most satisfaction out of your own life. Number 4, meditation, meditation, meditation. I want to focus on 2 kinds of meditation. There are many kinds, and I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of methodologies or practices. But the first thing I want to focus on is focus. Today, in the modern world, focus is a hot commodity. It is extremely valuable because it is difficult to do with all of the distractions we have around us. We have these phones that have more information in them than, the Library of Alexandria. You can access millions upon millions of scholarly articles, which is great, fantastic reservoirs of knowledge. Of course, we don't use them like that. We use them for gratuitous swiping and scrolling and nonsense that is not productive. So, to counteract that, to counteract the fact that we live in an environment that is not conducive to focus, yet we need to have focus to have fulfilling lives. We need to be able to focus on tasks, on time, on family and friends, on whatever, to accomplish things and to appreciate things. And meditation, in my opinion, is the remedy to that in large part. This style of meditation, which is probably closest to mindfulness meditation, where you focus on focusing. I personally close my eyes and just focus on, the black of my eyelids. But the purpose being, when thoughts come into your head, you notice them coming into your head and you observe, oh, okay, I had a thought come into my head. I'm going to go back to meditating, consciously having that thought. And it will be frustrating at first, of course, because your mind is not trained to do this. Our minds are trained to, after the 6-second TikTok or reel or whatever it may be is complete, to swipe and get a completely new set of stimulus and a completely new voice and a new face and a new background music and a new color scheme. So focusing on one thing, which is essentially nothing, focusing on nothing, focusing on being present in the moment, tactile sensations of your feet on the ground, your hands touching each other, your breath coming in and out of your lungs, focusing on the present experience. And as you become distracted, because it will happen, not getting frustrated with yourself, but just acknowledging that you were distracted and that you're going to go back to focusing on the present moment. When you do this, as Justin alluded to in the most recent episode, it restructures your mind in a very significant way. And it sounds silly, especially before you've done it, because it's just like, what, I'm going to sit there and do nothing and have, a different perspective on things? Well, yes and no. I mean, you're still you. You're still the same person. And there are types of meditation where you meditate on a subject. You'll just sit there and think about something. But in the case where you sharpen your mind to focus, you will invariably eventually come to a quiet state where before you had thoughts constantly bombarding you from the subconscious or the preconscious or whatever, and you have to acknowledge them, say, okay, I realize I was distracted, I'm going to go back to focusing on the present moment. But then as you build this practice, especially over, if you're meditating for 20 minutes or more for a while, the time period between distractions will increase and increase and increase and increase. And the result of that branches into every area of your life, because it's not like that's a different part of your mind. That's the same brain you use for everything else. It's the same brain you use to write your essays, the same brain you use to, do work at your job or journal in your notebook or write songs in your free time. It's the same brain. So as you build this practice that really does not take very much time, but takes a lot of attention, which is why it's difficult, because I've mentioned this before, attention is extremely valuable to yourself and also to everyone else. As you build up this practice, you will notice that you can focus on things in a way that other people can't. And beyond that, because you can focus in such a way, your ability to focus on your day, on how you use your time. Because once your brain isn't constantly bombarded with nonsense, you realize how much empty space there is in the day. And I mean, this is why people tend to meditate in the morning, because it clears your mind and you realize how much stuff you can actually accomplish in a day versus kind of just like flowing throughout the day, waking up and just going about your day. The reason this is so significant is because when you lose those distractions, you notice how much empty space is between tasks that was normally spent distracted and absent thought, or distracted by social media, or distracted by, Netflix or YouTube or whatever it is. When you don't get distracted so easily, you notice, oh wow, there's a lot of extra time in the day to accomplish things. There's a whole lot of extra time in the day to accomplish things. Eventually you'll get to the point where you're using all that time and there still won't be enough time in the day, but that's one of the biggest benefits of focused meditation. The other aspect of meditation that I wanted to speak about was creative meditation. And this may not seem like it's applicable to everybody, but I think that it is, because creativity is not just something for musicians or something for artists. If you're an entrepreneur, there's a creative process there. If you're a normal employee, there's a creative process to going about your work, or maybe your passions outside of work. And another aspect of the distraction that we live with on a daily basis is your brain is always processing something. It's always processing external stimulus. Your brain is going to run regardless, right? It's not like your brain turns off. Sometimes it can feel that way, but your brain doesn't just turn off. So what happens when you take away all this stimulus? When you're not watching the TV and the computer and on your phone all at the same time, and having an absent conversation with someone else in the house. Well, when it's not like your brain is running on overdrive during that time. Your brain can just, it can hear as much as it can hear. It can see as much as it can see. It doesn't change. But when that stops requiring computative, filtering to try to understand, what is the TV saying? What is my phone saying? What is the laptop saying? What is my friend saying? When all of that is distilled down and you don't have these distractions, which is part of the practice of building a meditative space, cultivating a space where you can be quiet and not have it infringed upon. Well, what is your brain gonna do with all of that extra computing power? All that extra brain power. And it is my opinion that, and this is reflected, I think, through other artists as well, but that's where your creativity comes. Your brain is with itself, and it can work on the things that it wants to work on. And when it doesn't have to process all of this external media just being bombarded over and over and over again, then it can process whatever it wants. It can generate ideas instead of consuming them. And I think this is something, I don't know these people, but I've heard something similar that like Rick Rubin does, and some of these people who tend to be maybe a little bit out there, but from a creative standpoint are, giants. And it makes sense to me. Why would you expect to be creative while you're just processing other people's information? You have to turn that off for a while. You have to turn that off and give space, create a space for your mind to generate its own ideas, to sit down and think about, if you're a musician, think about musical composition. If you're an artist, think about, color composition. A photographer, a writer, an entrepreneur, figuring out what niche to fill. Because you can watch and listen to self-help and financial stuff and artistic memoirs and all of this stuff, and it will give you raw material, but as long as you're just processing raw material, your brain can't generate its own material. So those are the two aspects of meditation that I wanted to bring to the forefront. Number 5, put intent behind everything you do. This is maybe the most important point on this list, because if you implement intent into everything you do, I believe it will lead you down the path of accomplishing the other things on this list, or being aware of them enough to make good decisions with respect to these obstacles and observations. I like to think about intent as having the reins in your hand if you're riding a horse. Now, I like elephants, so I'm going to think of it as having the reins in your hand if you're riding an elephant. And an elephant is powerful, and wherever you steer that elephant, there's going to be an impact, a significant impact. The ground will quake in the path that you lead it. And I believe that your potential influence and impact on your community, on yourself, on your loved ones is immense if directed effectively. If you lead the elephant in circles, it's not going to accomplish very much. But it could also carve a path through the forest for you. When you go to the gym, you hear about mind-muscle connection, focusing on every rep. As you contract your bicep, you focus on contracting your bicep. It's not really just about moving the weight from, the ground up. It's about contracting the muscles in the proper order with the proper technique, and the weight just happens to move almost. And this intentioned approach to weightlifting is, commonly touted as the right approach, at least as far as getting the most out of your workout, doing it in the safest way, and getting the largest, growth from the muscle group that you're working out. Because you're not compensating in little weird ways with other muscle groups. You're very intentioned on what you're doing. The same goes with everything in life. Focusing on brushing your teeth. If you brush your teeth for 2 minutes and you're just kind of, brushing them absent-mindedly like we all do, sure, they'll get clean. And maybe this is kind of a silly example, but if you take 2 minutes and you're methodical and you're thinking about, have I hit every area exactly long enough? Have I made sure that the toothpaste has gotten into every crevice of every tooth? They're going to be cleaner at the end, right? And in something minor like brushing your teeth, it may not matter. But I think that how you do one thing is how you do everything. Not literally, but almost. If you cut corners in the little things, you probably cut corners in the big things. And starting with smaller habits and infusing them with intention, like brushing your teeth or exercising or something as simple as working on a skill you're trying to develop, right? Taking the time, I'm going to dedicate 20 minutes a day to speaking articulately into the microphone to practice being a better orator. That 20 minutes of intentioned effort is going to compound upon itself, if it's done every day, so significantly over an extended period of time in comparison to just showing up and recording. Having the intention behind what you want to do before you go into it gives you direction and guides your actions during the process that will lead you to the outcome that you're looking for. It's a gripe that I have in general with, going to and paying for college at such a young age. People go into schooling when they're unintentioned. They're just floating around, just learning random things, hopefully learning. Because there's no impetus and there's no pressure from within to get anything out of the classes you're taking. And the longer you find yourself in an area mentally without intention, the longer you're just going to dither around in life and not accomplish great things, because great things take time and effort and intention. And this is something I spoke about with Justin and Jake. Jake mentioned, taking time to think about your values and your pillars of belief. And this is another aspect of intention. It's not coming to a task with intention. It's coming to life with intention. It's sitting down and thinking, these are the things I want to accomplish with my time on this planet. These are the kind of experiences I want to have and connections I want to make. And as I spoke about with meditation, once you come to things with intention, it frees up space because you're not wasting time doing things that are ancillary or unnecessary, or just you happened to be doing them because you grew up doing them, or your friends did them, or whatever it may be. And once you've locked in on your goal, and you come to each task with intention, and with purpose, and with drive, then getting there looks much closer to a straight line than before. If my goal is to become mayor and I have no intentioned actions and steps to get there, then it's just an abstract goal that really doesn't have any meaning. But if I sit down and say, I want to learn the laws of my city, the ones that work for the citizens here, the ones who don't, or the laws that don't. I want to get to know the people who are impacted by these things. I want to learn how the passing of laws is conducted in my district. Taking the time to think about what you're trying to accomplish and how to accomplish it, as well as why you're trying to accomplish it, which branches back to the pillars of belief, is such an advantage in life because you can cut through all of the BS. You don't get lost. You don't get confused. You don't get distracted because you know what you want to do and you know what the next step is. You don't have to know all the steps in between here and there. You don't need to know the future. Your plan doesn't have to go according to plan. But if you sit down and think about it, you can come up with the next step. Number 6, the stories we consume have a great impact on our lives. This harps back to the first conversation I had with Jacob on the show. The way that we think about our lives, whether we realize it or not, is usually in the frame of a story. It's in the frame of overcoming hardship, or victimization and triumphing or failing. There's always a plot or a thread to follow. Rarely do people think of their lives as just a string of random events. We associate meaning with things that happen in our lives, and we associate consequence and meaning to those things, whether it's there or not. The stories we consume, and when I say stories, as Jacob alluded to in our conversation, I do mean stories like on social media. I do mean stories like books. I do mean stories like TV and movies and stories that our friends tell us. Those stories that we consume impact us because that's the raw input that our brain is taking in, as I mentioned earlier. And it's running on these cycles, on these patterns of thought. So if you're fed negative stories, the output will be negative patterns of thought. And that's a very obvious and blanketed way to describe something negative. But there's all different kinds of negativity. It's narcissism and neuroticism and OCD, or fear of failure, fear of accomplishment, fear of humiliation. And as I spoke about earlier with social media, fear of inadequacy, of not comparing to the idealizations that you see on social media. So it's important to cultivate the stories that you consume. Storytellers have always held high positions in our societies because stories are important. They're integral to humanity. They help us associate who we are, who other people are, and where we fall in the grand narrative of our kingdom, our country, our community, our family. And that's not a coincidence because a storyteller has the power to shape all of those things. A storyteller can change your mood because a scary story can scare you. A happy story can make you happy. A sad story can make you sad. So the way that we view our lives as stories and have a perspective on spin on things is extremely important. The stories that we consume are extremely important. And to take it a step further, even the fiction that we consume is important. And the reason I harp on fiction specifically is because, it's common to view it as inconsequential because it's not true. Truth is not the only important thing in the world. It's not the only impactful thing in the world. And fictional stories give us an opportunity to add stakes and appreciation and dive into empathetic scenarios that we wouldn't otherwise be able to. They allow us to stretch our ethical and moral muscles to think about what we would have done in a situation or how we feel about other characters' actions within a story, within the context that we are invested in. It's a safe place to do that. Because otherwise you'd have to do it in real life. And not everything in fiction is something you want to do in real life. I've heard many times from friends and acquaintances that they don't like reading fiction. And the sense that I've gotten is that because it's not serious enough, or it's not real, or it's not, like, where's the value? Something that Jacob alluded to, or really explicitly stated in our first conversation, was you don't know what you're going to get out of it. That's true. It's not like reading a book on finance or real estate or building a house, because you're not going to come out of it knowing finance or real estate or how to build a house. You're going to come out of it with something profound that you didn't expect to come out of it, because stories have a purpose. Someone doesn't sit down and write hundreds to thousands of pages without any purpose. And I would also encourage you to take a chance on reading fiction. Most people enjoy TV or movies that are fictional. We can all think of good fictional shows or movies that inspired us or made us feel a certain way, or were just intense experiences. The idea that because it's written in a book as fiction and not portrayed as a movie or a film, or even as music, most music is fiction as well, that it's somehow less enjoyable or less meaningful is kind of silly. So take advantage of the opportunity to expand your lexicon from reading, but also expand your ability to empathize and put on other people's shoes and appreciate the diverse experiences that everyone around you has through reading fiction, through experiencing things that otherwise you probably couldn't experience. Number 7, regression is inevitable. In my conversations so far, a common thing that has come up, in large part because I asked the question, but also because it's relevant to everyone, is how to handle regression, taking steps backwards, not accomplishing what you set out to accomplish, dealing with failure. I bring it up a lot because I think it is one of the biggest obstacles, and I use that word on purpose, because an obstacle is often seen as something in the way. But if you think of life as an obstacle course, you go through the obstacles, you navigate around them, you incorporate them into your plan to get to the end goal. It's not, it's an obstacle course doesn't make sense if you can just, walk past everything. Purpose is the obstacle. The purpose is to hone yourself, prepare yourself, and use yourself and your capabilities to get past things, to get through things, to build a repertoire of skills and knowledge and competencies that make obstacles just that, obstacles, not immovable objects or impassable walls. They're just things that are kind of in the way, but are surmountable. With regression and failure, there's a lot of hope and fear, shame, humiliation tied into these things, because, as Justin said on the last episode, when people fail, sometimes they ascribe that failure to themselves and view themselves as a failure, when in actuality, everyone fails, so everyone's a failure. And if everyone's that, it's essentially meaningless. The people at the top of whatever respective food chain you're looking at have failed an incalculable number of times. They've failed in little ways, they've failed in big ways, they've failed in ways that you're probably not even aware. And being able to put that into perspective and see that those steps back are preparing you for your steps forward. They're giving you solid foundation and knowledge and skills to avoid making the same mistake and to predict different mistakes in the future. That's part of resilience. That's part of being a capable individual, as I mentioned earlier. These steps backward are not in isolation. They're not in a vacuum. They're in the context of your full journey. They're in the context of all the factors that led up to there and all the factors that will follow after. One perspective on regression that I like to take is using it to compare to your old self. I've mentioned this before. Taking these times where you're in situations that you've previously been in, you become complacent or gone backward to a situation that probably is not going to work for you, and using it as a test for the difference for a change of character that you've made, for a change in who you are and the things you're capable of and the things you expect out of life. Maybe you worked at Walmart, you moved on, you tried to pursue a passion in painting, and a couple years later you hit rough times and you're back at Walmart. That can feel like the end of the world. But when you get back there and you're, maybe miserable to some extent, how clear is it? How night and day is it that is not meant for you? That you need to find a way out, that you need to find a way to make your artistry work. Because, as I've mentioned multiple times so far, everything is relative. Everything is relative. And if you can go back, with the proper mindset, it's not truly going back. It's catapulting you. It's drawing the bowstring back, right? The arrow has to be knocked and pulled backwards before it can be launched forward. And when you can think of your aggression and your steps backward and your mistakes in that context, it makes it so much more clear that this is just a small part of the journey, a small part of your story where you were preparing to do something great. Finally, a bonus takeaway. You have to fall in love with the process, not the product. The end goal cannot be your only motivation. Something I've learned multiple times, and I've learned again in the context of this podcast, is for you to make it through the grind of doing hard work, you have to enjoy the hard work. People have a limited amount of willpower. There's not unlimited source to draw from. And if your only motivation, if your only goal is to, for example, with this podcast, if my only goal was to hit 1 million views on an episode, how monumental of a task would that seem? How disheartening would it be week after week after week, month after month of not hitting 1 million? Would that be? Because it's not a sustainable viewpoint. And that's how it is with all hard work. With my other accomplishments outside of the podcast, I never focused on just the end goal. It was a day-to-day process. It was a weekly process. There were small wins, as Justin brought up, and I thought was really important to highlight here. The small wins matter. The small wins are what keep you going. And those small wins are what make the process enjoyable. If you never count your wins, then you're only counting losses. If you never count your wins, you're only counting losses. So don't think of your small wins as negligible or you're too good for them. Appreciate them. Appreciate them for what they are and for how far you've come. And cultivate your goals to reinforce the process, to reinforce the effort that goes in and the hard work that goes in behind the scenes to whatever you're working on. Because there's no way you're going to make it to an example, a goal like 1 million views if that's your only goal along the way and you don't figure out a way to enjoy the work, to enjoy editing the video or editing the audio or recording them or interviewing or the conversations themselves. There's no way I would have even made it this far. There's no way to accomplish anything great when the only score you're keeping track of is all of your mistakes and then one big win at the end. That's silly. It's ridiculous. It's not sustainable, and that's not how people accomplish great things. And when you give yourself those wins, you give yourself positive reinforcement and positive feedback to build off of, and it makes it so that even on days when you don't have motivation, you can pull into that limited source of willpower. And then when that runs out, you can look at your wins. So you're not just always relying on, I'm just going to grind it out until I'm successful, until I'm what I consider to be success, which is the 1 million views or the 1 million listens or the $1 million. These arbitrary standards that we put for ourselves, if they're going to be arbitrary, why not make them feasible? Why not make them and design them in a way and curate them for the purpose of moving you towards success, instead of just rewarding an improbable success at the end of the journey without any encouragement along the way? Because you won't always get encouragement along the way. Everyone's path is their own individual path, and there are people who help us along that path, but at the end of the day, it's your choice. It's your road to walk. And of course there'll be naysayers and people who don't agree or believe or whatever it may be. And that's fine if you have your own personal, internal yay-sayers, people who agree with you, or yourself who agrees with you, who encourages you, who writes down tangible goals that they can accomplish and feel proud of, and they can point to internally or externally and say, wow, I did that. The path to success is different for everyone, but invariably the path to a successful life is a long one because it takes a lifetime. And there will be plenty of people throughout your life who do not agree with what you're doing or do not believe in what you're doing. And they will think that you are not going to succeed, and that might be maliciously, or it might be just out of ignorance, or they may be right. In fact, a lot of the time they will be right, because, as I said earlier, we all fail. And we all fail a lot. They may not be big failures, but we all fail a lot. And these people, which is, like I said, it doesn't have to be malicious, but these people who don't necessarily believe in what you're trying to do, they may be right a lot. But it's not about whether or not they're right. It's about whether or not you are hitting the goals that you want to accomplish. Because you only have to be right once. You only have to hit your success once for it to all be worth it. You only have to reach that goal once to be like, wow, I did that. Sure, I stumbled along the way and people said bad things about me. But I got that, and that's a real thing that I did. And so it can be difficult to navigate that walk of knowing that you're going to fail along the way and pushing yourself to be successful anyway. And that's difficult to navigate. But if you enjoy the process and you love the work, you can find out a way to make yourself love the work you're doing and take pride and satisfaction in the work you're doing. These small failures along the way, they won't really bother you. They're inconsequential to the satisfaction and joy you derive from doing the thing, from editing the video, from writing the song, from working on the business. And because they're inconsequential, in comparison, they won't wear you down. They won't drain that reservoir of willpower, which leaves you in a better position and better postured to continue in a sustainable way that will eventually, hopefully, lead you to that grander view of success. Thank you so much for watching and listening today. I hope you enjoyed the different format, and next week we'll be back with our typical interview and conversational style. Like, subscribe, and follow to stay up to date with new content as it comes out. I appreciate your support and encourage you to exchange your thoughts down in the comment section below. And as always, keep an open mind.